little bit about what is Archivist for the Walt Disney Company? What do you guys do? I thought that would be helpful grounding for the group before I ask you a couple questions.
Sure. So as an archivist for Walt Disney Archives, I'm responsible for not only maintaining information we have about the company from decades past, but also capturing current information about the company today. So we go out there and we try to find things that we think are going to be important to the company's history, not only from yesteryear, but also to the future of the company. In my particular role, we also do a lot of research. So if someone says, hey, when was this built? Or, hey, can you proofread this book we're releasing through Disney Publishing? We're the ones who look at that and we fact check, we make sure that the information's accurate before it goes out there to the world. And of course we do things like this too, like talking to the public, talking about Disney history, letting people know about the amazing history and heritage of the Walt Disney Company. A lot of people think that we're historians of the archives, and while we do know a lot about the Walt Disney Company, we're more so here to find information about the history of the company. So I may not know everything about a particular Disney film or theme park attraction, but I can find that information if anyone ever needed to know everything about a particular film or attraction or whatever someone was interested in terms of Disney history. So we're kind of the finders of the magic, if you will.
Great. So just to kick things off, so obviously 3 super significant attractions. Why do you think they are so significant to not only, Walt Disney's early vision, but just how they've retained sort of like this importance with guests?
Well, in my opinion, they're significant first and foremost because it ties back to Walt Disney. I mean, Disneyland, let's face it, is Walt Disney. You can't think of this park without thinking of Walt first. And I also think that these attractions are so beloved because the perfect combination of both fantasy and future. So when these 3 attractions opened, there was nothing else like this in the world. And to have a monorail, no other amusement park or any sort of place at Disneyland had a monorail. There was no roller coasters like the Matterhorn, and there definitely weren't any submarine rides anywhere in the country. So because they're so unique, I think that's why they still endure to this day. And just the fact that all 3 of these attractions opened together, 3 e-ticket attractions, not only opening in the same park, but opening in the same vicinity, crisscrossing each other. Today, we do a lot of expansions like Star Wars Land, huge, big productions, but back then, to have these attractions opening, these complex attractions together, it was really something special. And I think because of that, today, they're still fondly remembered by fans like myself and you guys too. So 60 years ago, not only did these 3 attractions open, but there was also filming for ABC television for the Gala Day at Disneyland. Or back then as known as Kodak Presents Disneyland 59. So on this day, there's that famous TV special where they had the parade down Main Street. It was hosted by Walt Disney and Art Linkletter. And this expansion was known as the second grand opening of Disneyland. This was the first major expansion. So that television program was filmed this day 60 years ago, and then it was shown the next day on June 15, 1959. And in our files, when I was looking for information before I came here, there was an estimation that 93 million people saw Kodak Presents Disneyland 59 on June 15, 1959. So it was a big deal. And so we're not only celebrating these 2 attractions, we're also celebrating that landmark television special that was filmed back then. So in 59, you had the monorail station above the Submarine Voyage, and that was the one and only station. And the monorail just went around Tomorrowland and part of Fantasyland. And then in 1961, you had the monorail expanded over to the Disneyland Hotel, where a second station was built. And when the monorail was expanded, that was the first time that a monorail had ever gone across a major road, or at least gone alongside a major road. And then also in 61, you had the Mark II monorail debut. So in 59, you had the first version of the monorail. In 61, you had the second version of the monorail debuting. And then in 1969, the Mark III monorail debuts. Then 86, you don't have Mark IV because Mark IV debuts at Walt Disney World in 71. So at Disneyland in 86, you have the Mark V monorail debuting. And then in 2001, you had this station built here at Downtown Disney. And the monorail station that was built at the Disney Hotel was demolished, so this one could be the new second platform for the monorail. Then in 2008, you have the Mark VII monorail, which you see behind me, that debuted, and that is our current fleet of monorail. So, as you guys probably know, so the Matterhorn was Disneyland's first thrill ride. And when it debuted, it was unique for a couple reasons. First, it had the first use of tubular steel for the roller coaster track. And that was unique because that allowed the vehicles to twist and turn unlike any other roller coaster that had been ever produced to that point. You also had multiple vehicles on the track at one time. At that point, roller coasters didn't do that. You usually had one car on the track at all times. The monorail not only had two tracks, but had multiple cars going at one time. And then the Skyway also went through the Matterhorn, and it was advertised as going through these glaciers and seeing these alpine passes, but really it was just, you were looking at the track as you went through the Matterhorn. It really wasn't quite as grand as it was described. But then in 1978, the Matterhorn underwent a major refurbishment. So at the time, it was being promoted as what's gotten into the Matterhorn, and that's when they added the Abominable Snowman. And that's also when they improved the Matterhorn. So they also added tandem bobsleds. So instead of just one sled, you had two sleds that increased the capacity for the Matterhorn. You had enhanced show scenes. So the lift was completely enclosed. You had snowflake projections as you went up the lift. And those passes that in 59 just looked generic were done up a little bit more, so it looked like those alpine passes, those icicle caverns. But the big addition was the addition of the Abominable Snowman. And the growl of the Yeti at that point was actually voiced by someone who worked at Walt Disney Imagineering. They had a contest to see who could produce a growl that they could use for the Abominable Snowman. So they picked one of the cast members at WED, and on certain parts of the day, if it was windy at Disneyland, you could hear that growl across the park. And then in the early 2010s, so in 2015, we updated the Matterhorn again. So we had a brand new Abominable Snowman animatronic, which is what you all see today inside the attraction. And the Walt Disney Archives was lucky enough to get the 1978 Abominable Snowman in our collection. And if any of you went to the expo, the D23 Expo in 2015, if you saw our exhibit, you saw we had the 1978 Abominable Snowman on display there at our exhibit. There is one at Guardians of the Galaxy, so WDI also was able to get one of the Abominable Snowman, and so that's the one that you guys will see in the queue for Guardians of the Galaxy mission breakouts at Disney California Adventure. But the snowman that the Yeti, or the Abominable Snowman that the Archives has, that is safe and sound in one of our warehouses. So he lives in a crate, free from any heat or any sort of dust or any damage. So ours is safely packed away. Yeah, so the Submarine Voyage, so to tie it back to Walt, depending on the source you go to, the submarine ride was developed in either one of two ways. It was either developed because Dick Irvine, who was the head of WED Enterprises at the time, suggested a glass-bottom boat ride to Walt, and Walt said, well, why don't we just make a submarine ride? If you go by what Disney legend Bob Gurr says, he said that someone made an offhand comment one day that Disneyland has everything, but it doesn't have submarines. And so he said that someone said that to Walt, and he said, well, we're going to make submarines. So whichever source you go to, it always ties back to Walt Disney. He wanted to have a submarine ride here at Disneyland. Now, what was great about the original Submarine Voyage is that it was based on reality. So it was based on the actual submarine, the USS Nautilus, which of course was based on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But the USS Nautilus was the first nuclear-powered submarine in the world. It was also the first submarine to complete a submerged voyage underneath the North Pole. So this attraction was inspired by that. When the attraction opened, they actually had the Nautilus submarine, and the other submarines were named after the rest of the nuclear-powered submarines that the United States had at that time. This attraction was unique when it opened because, as I said earlier, there weren't submarine rides at other amusement parks. This really was the first of its kind, and it was based in reality. Even though there was a lot of fantasy involved, it was based on what was going on at that point in the history of the United States. And also was unique about this attraction was that it had a lot of things that guests remember fondly. So of course you had the mermaids that people talk about so often when they think about this attraction. Of course they introduced special effects underwater, which Disney had never accomplished before. And a lot of those underwater effects were tested at the Disney Studio lot. They actually dug a hole in the ground and filled it with water and then made a mock-up of the insides of the submarines. So the special effects artists could sit there in the mock-ups and see all of the effects underwater before they installed them here at the park. And then when this attraction first opened, it was sponsored by General Dynamics Corporation, which helped develop the attraction. And then when this attraction opened in 1959, they actually brought out Charles Kirkpatrick, who was the admiral of the U.S. Navy at that time, and he helped dedicate this attraction. And then you guys have probably seen the video of this attraction being christened with the woman breaking the champagne bottle over the ship, almost falling into the water herself. And that was actually a wife of one of the crew members of the USS Nautilus. He came out here with his family, and they had his wife do the opening ceremonies for the attraction. So the next attraction you had like this was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which opened at Walt Disney World in 1971. Very similar to this attraction, except that one was a lot more fantasy-based. It was, of course, based on the 1954 live-action film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And where this one was more based on kind of research and kind of the real world, the 71 20,000 Leagues version of Walt Disney World, like I said, was more so just purely fantasy. And then this attraction pretty much stayed the same up until 1998. There were some cosmetic changes to the subs over the years, but up until 1998, the original version of the attraction pretty much remained intact. And then, of course, the submarine lagoon just kind of sat here for a couple years. And for many years, it was said, oh, this area is going to be redeveloped. We're going to do something new. We're imagining something new and grand. And then in 2007, the Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage reopened, which of course what we have here today, based on the 2003 Disney Pixar film Finding Nemo. But if you guys go to the international parks, there's also a lot of other tributes to submarine-based attractions. So Tokyo Disney Sea, the area around the mysterious island, you actually have a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea attraction in which you are going underwater. But for that attraction, there's no actual water, but the way that the attraction is laid out, it feels and looks like you're actually traveling underwater. And you also have the Aqua Topia at Tokyo Disney Sea, which you don't go under the water, but you're traveling above the water in a seemingly random pattern. And then Disneyland Paris, in their version of Tomorrowland, Discovery Land, you have a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea Nautilus that is there. You actually go inside there. But this one really is the most unique out of the rest of the submarine attractions. Of course, we don't have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea anymore at Walt Disney World. It's now the Little Mermaid attraction. When this attraction was first installed, there was a lot of trouble maintaining the integrity of the paint. Because of the filtration system and the way the water was, the effects would fade. It was the paint would fade over time. And at one point, they discovered that if they used recycled glass as a base for their paint, that color would stay around a lot longer than if they had been using the paints they were using originally for the attraction. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting, so when I was doing research for this attraction, I saw a quote by Joe Fowler, Disney legend Joe Fowler, who was in charge of all construction of Disneyland at the time. And he was saying that they considered bringing in the U.S. Navy to help develop this attraction. And Joe Fowler, being a retired U.S. Admiral of the U.S. Navy, he said, oh, if you do that, it's just going to be involved in a bunch of red tape, and we're never getting anything done. So they didn't use the U.S. Navy when they did this attraction. They asked for advice, but they didn't actually bring them in as consultants because they knew things wouldn't get done. And what was great about this point in the history of Disneyland is that when they wanted to do things, they just did them. Things got done so quickly. Bob Gurr has said that they didn't have project managers, they didn't have project coordinators. They just did things. Walt would come in and say, yeah, let's do that. And they would do it. And what's interesting about this attraction and the rest of the 59 Disneyland attractions is that they were done in just a couple months. Development in these attractions started late in 1958 and it opened by June of 59. Today things move at a little bit slower pace, but back then to have 3 e-tickets built in just a couple months and open to guests, that's amazing.